Right, so,
Thank you.
got the microphone on, shall we make a start? Welcome to Harlow Council's Cabinet meeting. Are there any apologies from absence? No? Thank you. Before we move on, I'd just like to inform people we're not going to be discussing item 16 today, future bus station provision. We'd like...
Bus shelter, not bus.
What did I say? Station? I can't read my own writing, I do apologise. Bus shelter provision, as we will take a further look at the proposal in the light of information from the Garden Town. Any declarations of interest? Minutes. Are we happy to approve the minutes held of the Cabinet meeting held on the 20th of June 2019?
Agreed.
Thank you. There are no written questions from any matters arising. I do apologise. I would like to draw your attention, actually, if there's nothing else, we look at the matters arising from the minutes, to the public space protection order for the town centre. This should actually be coming into force from the 5th of August, following advice on signage and other things required. Jane, would you like to expand on that just for a moment?
Yes, so the order's now been sealed, and people have the right to appeal against the order for a period of 6 weeks from the date of the Cabinet, so that takes us up to the 25th of July. So at the moment we're producing the signage and the leaflets, and there'll be a information sharing and education process going on with members of the public, and the order will start from the 5th of August after the 6 weeks has expired.
Excellent.
Thank you. There are no written questions from the public. There is a written question from Councillor Vince.
Yeah.
Would you like to read it?
Yeah, obviously. At full council on the 11th of July, Councillor Carter said that the council had given £3 million of right to buy receipts back to the government. Can the leader please state whether this is true, and if so, set out the reasons why the money has been given back to the government?
Okay. When Councillor Carter said Harlow had given back £3.5 million to the government from unspent right to buy receipts in the financial year 2018-19, he was guilty of oversimplifying the situation to a degree that could have been very misleading to Harlow residents. The simple unvarnished truth is that £3.5 million of Harlow's right to buy council house sales receipts was taken from Harlow because Tory policy at a national level made it impossible to do anything else. Under current arrangements, the receipts generated through right to buy housing disposals are repayable to the government. The regulations allow authorities to retain those receipts, but only if they intend to utilise them for the replacement of housing stock, either through new build, conversion or open market purchase. Unfortunately, the regulations also state that receipts that are retained by a local authority can only contribute up to 30% of the cost of replacing the homes lost under right to buy. The local authority therefore has to fund the additional 70% of any scheme it implements. The regulations also state that if right to buy receipts are retained, they must be applied to schemes and must be used within a 3-year period. If this is not achieved, then the full value of the receipts must be repaid to the government in full, and with the addition of a 4% interest charge. Based upon the Council's housing pipeline costing in the region of 14 million in the next 3 years, the Council has already retained 4 million of 2017-18 right to buy receipts to contribute towards 30% of the cost of these schemes. However, during 2018-19, the Council was unable to retain any further receipts because of the 3-year time restriction placed upon the use of those receipts by government regulations. The Council lost £3.5 million of its receipts in 2018-19 as a result of the government's regulations, money which could have been retained in Harlow, for Harlow, if the time restriction and interest penalties had not been in place. The Council expects to continue to retain right to buy receipts during the 2019-20 period to help to fund later stages of its housing delivery pipeline. Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yep. Could Harlow not have borrowed to speed up delivery of new homes and must retain the 3.5 million that Councillor Cole mentioned after all the cap on borrowing for houses was lifted by this government?
Well, look, Chris, that is something that we looked into. Unfortunately, the removal of the borrowing cap really wasn't of much help to Harlow. It came after legislation in 2012 that was imposed, again by the Tories, that required Harlow, like all other councils in the country, to buy its own stock of council houses in return for the right to keep council house rents. Harlow had to borrow £250 million, £250 million to buy its own housing stock from the government. And in return for that, we got the right to keep the rents. Well, actually, the rents paid the interest on that loan, that £250 million. And it even paid a small amount of the capital. Unfortunately, further legislation demanded that councils cut council rents by 1% a year for a period of 4 years. So our ability to repay the interest and some of the capital was destroyed. In effect, what we've been able to do since the rent reductions is pay only the interest. So although it was legally possible to borrow more, in terms of being able to repay it and be financially responsible, it was impossible, again, thanks to Tory legislation. Of course, had the core government support given to Harlow, since 2010, not been cut by £7 million as a cumulative total, we'd have had enough money in the bank to keep it all. But they cut their as well. So was Councillor Carter right to say we've given back £3.5 million of right to buy receipts to the government? No, you weren't. We were forced, over a barrel, by a raft of Tory legislation, to hand over money. There was no legal or financially responsible way of retaining. Yet again, Tory councillors identify a problem caused by a Tory government, and instead of pushing back on Harlow's Tory MP, who so faithfully voted for the legislation that enabled this situation, they attempt to put the blame at Harlow Council's doors, and they sit there laughing about the £3.5 million that the Tories took from us.
Yeah, they do.
Thank you.
I think it's funny.
And we will move on. Yes, I have prepared answers.
Yeah.
I think that's part of my job. Petitions. There are none. Forward plan. Is it noted?
Noted.
Oh, you need to be a bit quicker than that in future, Councillor Carter, but go on.
Thank you, Chair. On page 12, there's an item about the Article 4 directive coming forward in...
Sam, would you put your mic on? Thank you.
Yes, I'm impressed people are actually listening to what I'm saying.
Oh.
On page 12, on the third item, Townwide Article 4 directive, coming to September, does that mean we'll get a decision from the Secretary of State by that date?
It's Jenny.
So it's on the forward plan in case we have any objections, because if we have any objections it has to come back to Cabinet.
Oh.
If we don't have any objections we can just implement it.
Right. So we can actually do something. You know, that is a typical.
Yes.
Thank you. And another technical question. Page 21, the first item, the homelessness strategy. I have to confess I have been tracking this. I've been informed elsewhere that this should be coming to us in October. You know the date for it?
It's still indeed coming to October's Cabinet meeting.
So why isn't it in the work now?
I don't know, Councillor Carter. It's very clear that it's coming to October's meeting. I explained at the last meeting. I explained at the last meeting that it was originally governed in September, but we had to go out for legally to consultation, and it will now come to October's Cabinet meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Right, on that basis, are we happy to note the work plan?
Noted again.
Thank you. No decisions taken by myself or the Deputy or Portfolio Holder. So let's move on, please, to item 10, the Town Centre Area Action Plan, approval of Regulation 19 consultation, pages 23 to 175. Councillor Pert.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I apologise for the fact that we probably cut down 100 trees to reduce the full draft air action plan, but obviously it's there for members to consider. Now, this report refers to the next major step in the process of redeveloping the town centre, part of the requirement really for the future of the town. Our aspirations for the development of the garden town requires that we also redevelop a town centre that's appropriate for a much larger community, and obviously in order to also to bring it up to date, to make it more modern, more relative to the situation which we all observe, the changing face of retail, the need for more leisure and entertainment facilities, and also the whole question of the public realm that needs bringing up to date. All those things are referred to in the Town Centre Area Action Plan. But specifically this report tonight is concerning our the next step, which is to go to Regulation 19 consultation. If you look at page 35, it provides a handy step-by-step guide as to the 5 steps we've been through so far, the last one being the preparation of this very draft plan. And over the page on 36 it says we are here, we need to go to Regulation 19. Now, Regulation 19 consultation on this particular draft, as it states on page 35, should be considered against 4 tests. Is it positively prepared? Is it justified? Is it effective? And is it consistent with national policy? And obviously we consider that it is, but that is for the consultation process to, if people want to suggest that either they agree with us, or whether they feel that on one of those 4 tests the draft plan is non-compliant. After the consultation process, then obviously assuming on the assumption that it passes the 4 tests, as far as this cabinet is concerned, then we submit it to the final draft, which will then be the final draft, to an inspector and have the examination in public. And then we'll get the inspector's report, and by winter of this year into January next year, we should be in a position to be able to adopt and have adopted the final town centre area action plan, which will then be part of the overall local development plan for the whole town, and obviously, as far as we're concerned, an integral part of the plans for the garden town, which obviously go beyond our own boundaries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anything to second that?
I'm happy to second it and like to say a few words later on.
Any questions? No.
Thank you, Chair. A few open questions about the action plan itself. The first question I have, and it's something that I've brought up consistently, and I think it's a really important fact that all councillors agree with. As part of the Town Centre Action Plan and this ongoing consultation, what priorities the council, the administration, giving to designing the town centre for age and mobility? Given that we have an ageing population in the town, the number of 90-year-olds in Harlow is the highest outside London. These are factors that need to be taken into consideration when we look at how people flow through the town centre. And I was just wondering if the administration would give us some initial thoughts on that and how they could build that into potentially the consultation.
Thank you.
Well, as I say, Chair, the 4 tests include every aspect of the design of the future town centre, and obviously accessibility will be included in one of those 4 tests.
Thank you.
No specifics, is it? So the next question I have is clearly on pages 60 and 59 of the agenda, which relate to the action plan, you've looked at threats and strengths and weaknesses. Now, is there an updated risk register that sits behind the town centre action plan? And if that action plan has been updated since all the subsequent talks and the work on the action plan, what consideration has been given by the council, in particular around developer buy-in? Because that's really important and crucial with getting the town centre up and running. So I'd just be wondering if the portfolio holder or perhaps the senior officers could talk about that.
Danny, maybe you can say that?
The risk assessment will feature as part of the sustainability appraisal which we're just commissioning to be undertaken by ACOM, and that's going to take place over the next couple of months. And as we said in the report, that needs to be completed before the document is published for consultation. But that sort of risk assessment will feature as part of that sustainability appraisal, which is looking at social, economic, environmental impacts of the policies in this document and any risks associated with that. So that will feature as part of the overall package of consultation materials when that goes out to full consultation.
And that's really helpful. And I think in particular, developer buy-in is really crucial. And I was interested if the council itself had looked at allocating specific risks around this as it's been developing it. And I'd just be wondering, Andrew, if you specifically have given any consideration around that, because and this is public knowledge and it has been discussed before. Take, for example, the Strawberry Star Group that's taken over from Addington Capital. As we all know, and it's in the public domain, they took out a £10 million loan on a 12-month loan agreement. Are they going to be here for the long haul? What we want to see is developers buying into this vision and supporting its efforts. And that, to me, I think is a risk. It's not a risk that the council can completely control, don't get me wrong, but it is a factor that we need to take into consideration.
So, is there a question?
Yeah, there is.
Speech. No, but don't
If there was a question, I missed it, but have you an answer for his question?
Yeah, he does.
Well, I think absolutely we would acknowledge those points, and clearly we can't control all the actions of individual private developers, but I think what we would see is that the production of the area action plan, for the first time for Harlow Council, provides a set of really strong, robust policies that developers have to abide by, and will give us much stronger tools than we currently have in our armoury of planning policies to be able to influence what gets built in the town centre. The way that the area action plan has been drafted is in the spirit of positive planning. So it's about setting out aspirations and what we want to see to attract quality developers who buy into those aspirations. I think so. Hopefully, the document will achieve that.
I think, Councillor Charles, if I can just add to that, I share your concerns about short-termism, and it's certainly been a topic of debate in many different forums that I've been in about the need for a long-term vision.
Then the next question I have, and it's alluded to on page 60 under the threats, and it's in particular around investment and the council's considerations around a sustainable investment pathway for the ambitions it set out in the town centre action plan. I'll remind people there is cross-party consensus in the town centre action plan, and we are behind having a revitalised town centre. So my question is, does the council factor into its planning, whether it's a 10-year or 20-year cycle, the kinds of sustainable investment pathway it needs to achieve to realise the ambitions in the action plan?
I'm not sure, Chair, that is relevant to the town centre area action plan. That's more of a commercial discussion. And of course, as everybody knows, we have very little commercial ownership in the town centre. We are discussing the possibility with commercial operators in the town centre whether we could set up a business improvement district. Because obviously, as we proceed with this plan, there's no doubt that the private owners of almost all the town centre are going to benefit in terms of the value of their property from the improvements that we are seeking to make. And I think it's only right that they should not only participate positively in taking our whole aspiration forward, but actually contribute financially towards its achievement.
So just again, the portfolio holder hasn't got a grasp of his brief, because on page 60, under threats, it says investment delivered in isolation. That's a planning consideration and it's within this action plan. So my question is entirely valid, and it's a strategic one around everyone wants to get behind the town centre and revitalising it. My question is the forward planning around the kinds of investments you're going to need, kind of investments in certain areas, whether it's commercial space, etc. But on page 60 you refer to it in the plan. Perhaps you haven't even read your own action plan, and that didn't surprise me about you.
I'm not entirely sure what the question is again then. Councillor, have you read your plan?
Well, of course
That's the question.
I've been involved in drawing it up.
Right, any other questions? Right, any comments? Let's change things up a bit. Councillor Carter.
It's only 3.
Thank you, Chair. Page 85, it's an issue that came up at the presentation that we had recently about cycling.
About what?
Cycling, 85.
Yeah, cycling.
It's good to see that the issue is being addressed, particularly in the light of the PSPO, and there are going to be dedicated cycle routes and parking provision, as indicated on the map. But they will be. We're looking to the forward. It's a long way forward. But as Jane Greer has just been saying about the PSPO, about signage, there needs to be sort of clear signage and thought gone into the cycle routes, so cyclists know where they're welcome and where they're not. So, good.
Councillor Charles.
So, Chair, there's been a long-standing cross-party consensus on town centre regeneration. I think this action plan is important. But what I would say, first of all, I want to start off with a thanks, because Councillor Durkin, over many years, has followed the spirit of cross-party working on the town centre. And on a cross-party basis, I want to congratulate his constructive style in moving this forward, because actually it benefits the whole town that councillors, irrespective of their party, can work together on this, because it's obviously the town centre is an important linchpin into the local economy. Sadly, Councillor Purton is never on top of his brief. We've seen this time and time again, and we actually need some strategic thinking to carry the action plan forward. Councillor Purton is not showing that tonight and has been reluctant in answering questions that are legitimate around the investment pathway that we need to secure in the next 15 to 20 years for the town centre. The issues around ensuring that we preserve age and mobility, we preserve the opportunity to deliver a town centre in the future that factors in our ageing population, and the need to make sure that the town centre takes into consideration people with disabilities as well. These are important considerations, and I would have appreciated a more constructive approach by Councillor Purton, but his record speaks for itself that he's just simply not able to do that.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that, Councillor Charles. I thought Councillor Purton and the officers were very clear about how they're going to build in your concerns about our ageing population to the design for the town centre. I heard that very clearly. If anything, it was your question that towards the end that got a little bit vague. Nonetheless, let's move on. Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor
Yes, sorry,
Purton.
could I just say that...
Sorry, Councillor Purton.
sorry, Tony, did I?
No, carry on.
Can I just say that we have a purpose-built vehicle for inter-party discussions about all planning matters, which meets on a regular basis, and it's called the Local Development Plan Panel. Representatives from the opposition and representatives from the administration sit on it and converse quite amicably about all these issues in great detail. So it's not true to say. What I think is regrettable is that we turn up at a cabinet meeting to discuss a high-level decision about a process that's already gone through a number of stages, and what we get is basically showboating about nitpicking about things that will be part of the whole process, which is why I'm not particularly interested in participating in it.
Councillor Dirk.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the mention. I think we should all welcome this report, and I think we should all endorse it, because whilst historically we've done a lot of talking and we've done small wins, this is the real first chance that we've actually got to adopt a plan that will give us the tools and the opportunities to make the difference for this town moving forward. It's a long time overdue, and I think the difficulty is it's like everything, and I've used the word frustrating on quite a lot of occasions these days. It is frustrating that it takes us this time to get to this point, but we are at this point, and I think it's a unique point, and I think all the officers, past and present, should be congratulated for the work they've done, including the introduction when we had with Harlow Renaissance, because a lot of the work within this document has built on those particular areas. It is absolutely true that we've got to have access into the town, because historically, if you look at the town, it's a roundabout surrounded by a road looking inwards. It was a design for the time, but it's no longer a design for the future. So this provides us with that opportunity. And as the person with the economic portfolio, of course we want access, because access brings people and people bring money. And therefore shops and businesses want to thrive in our particular town. So one follows the other. If you don't build the roads, or the pathways, or the public ways, people will not come in, and they will not do, because at the end of the day, it is about trying to make the money. It's about businesses, hang on, that's Simon Dirt. It's about businesses, it's about leisure and pleasure, and it's about the whole town, not just a certain culture or a certain group in town. And I know it's frustrating because some people now view us as a coffee culture, and people don't want to come into town for that. We need to change that, and this gives us the tools, the opportunity, the influence on businesses currently and future to go out with that real investment. And the other point that you're making, absolutely, it's true. We have to invest, but we have to invest right, for the right reasons, with the right partners. And the group that you've discussed, yes, there are concerns, there are legitimate concerns, but these are businesses that have the right to buy and have the right to put those planning applications in, and not unless there is something legal, there is very little we can actually do. So we need to work with these people to make sure our town centre is the best for everybody, not just the few. So I welcome and endorse this report.
Awesome. Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Just in the short term, can we also do something about the existing access? When one looks at the underpass at Sharpcroft, not us do something, the county council, can the county council kindly do something about the existing access to the town centre at the moment? That access, which is supposedly designed for people in wheelchairs, etc., to go through, is so potholed, and it's been like this for years. Those are the sort of things that need addressing now, whilst we await the future development, and I hope that our Conservative colleagues will take it up with their Conservative colleagues in terms of getting something done in the short term about the appalling state of the access roads about around the town.
Yeah, I do appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Edwards, but this item is whether or not we approve this document to go out to section 19 consultation. Any other comments on the document, on agenda item 10? So, do we agree to accept the recommendations? A, that we approve the draft town centre action plan is published for the purposes of consultation under regulation 19 of the Town and Country Planning Act, and delegate authority to the Managing Director in consultation with the portfolio holders for environmental regeneration to make and approve any minor or inconsequential amendments to this plan arising from the completion of ensuing technical documents and any further legal advice.
Agreed.
Thank you. So let's now move on to item 11, page 176 to page 204, which is the JFPR, the Joint Finance and Performance report, and I am moving that. Do I have somebody to second it?
Chair.
Thank you. Can't talk and find the page at the same time. Give me a second. 176.
What doesn't fall?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's age. Right. So I'd like to start by drawing your attention to page 191. If you could turn there, which is the summary from our section from 151 from Mr. Freeman, Head of Finance, is summary about the latest financial position. And I'm going to draw a few sentences out of there. From the first paragraph, the Council continues to face financial challenges, especially those created by the long-term reductions in its core government funding, which have and will continue to feature within its medium-term financial strategy. Councils across the country, council leaders that I meet with, are crying out that in the forthcoming spending review, this Tory government starts to address these drastic cuts. As has been previously reported to Cabinet, the long period of austerity and the resulting budget reductions that have been required over an extended period to enable a balanced budget to be approved each year are now creating a much greater challenge at service level in terms of managing service costs and income to the approved budgets. And then if we look at the fourth paragraph, the final paragraph there, this report shows that there's a service underspend, if we look at the specifics, of £124,000 on controllable budgets. That's 0.21% of the council's gross budget. I think it shows, councillors, that we're running a very, very tight ship financially on the bits that we can control. Taking into account the non-controllable costs, there is a forecast underspend of 1.8 million, or 3% of the gross budget, mainly resulting from unplanned government support for the Business Rates Retention Scheme, a reduction in the cost of housing benefit, and the additional income generated through the winding up of Kia Harlow JB Co. and HTS fees as previously reported. Whilst this is a one-off sum, it's very, very welcome. And we will use this one-off 1.8 million as follows, and it's outlined elsewhere in the report. We'll use 1.3 million for environmental improvements, following on from the success of our spending last year. Some of which, much of which perhaps, will go towards easing parking in some of the worst affected estates. Harlow was not built for the number of cars that residents now have. We need to address that situation now. We're going to commit £400,000 for regeneration across the town, and we're going to commit £100,000 to secure the future of the museum, which, since we took it over in January, has been a major success. We've received nothing but plaudits from people that have visited it. And I'd like to take you to page 180, please, which talks about operational performance. And of course, without a sound financial basis, our operational performance couldn't happen. But let's look. Paragraph 20 says section 4 of the appendix details the council's operational performance. The council performed on or above target for 53 out of 53. That's 100% of its quarterly and annual performance indicators. And that's for the third successive quarter. Never before has the council achieved 100%, and now we've done it 3 quarters on the trot. It's a remarkable success, and I think we should take a moment to thank the officers of this organisation, the staff of this organisation, and our workers in HTS who have been able to deliver that incredible success actually. 21 says 62% of the indicators have been maintained or improved compared to quarter 4 of 2017-18. 94% of the corporate milestones were successfully completed, and the remaining 6% of the milestones were delivered due to were deferred due to changing priorities, or the due dates will take place in the new financial year. The council continues to improve its performance in key areas. The percentage of customer complaints responded to within the target town, there's an improvement. The target time, an improvement. The number of households living in temporary accommodations, we've improved there. Abandoned vehicles being investigated and removed within 24 hours, an improvement. The average time in hours to remove fly tips, and residents have commented on this. They've phoned me up and they said, people have dumped some rubbish. I phoned in within 24 hours, the fly tipping has gone. And that's a really important achievement, because where one person dumps rubbish, if it's left, others feel entitled to dump some more. Clear it up and it stops more rubbish being dumped. And customer satisfaction with grounds maintenance services has improved. Finally, I'd like you all to turn to page 198. There's some more headlines there, some more good news for the residents of Harlow, delivered by this council. 100% of offensive and non-offensive graffiti was removed within 24 hours. 100% of damaged bins were repaired or replaced within 2 working days. There's 100% compliance with landscape maintenance requirements. 100% compliance with prevention of dangerous trees reported, inspected and made temporarily safe within 24 hours to be dealt with properly in due course. 100% compliance with managing emergencies, and that's an attendance within 2 hours. 98% customer satisfaction with non-housing repairs. When you see all the other 100%, you wonder why it's not 100. Our call centre has consistently exceeded its target, performing at an average of 97% customer service level against a target of 90%. Health and safety. We completed 1.4 million working hours without an incident. Our AIR rating of 0 was achieved and maintained throughout the year. Our ROSPA Gold Health and Safety Award was achieved. Our ROSPA Gold Fleet Safety Award was achieved. And we achieved the British Safety Council Award with merit. Councillors, yet again, this is a good news story for Harlow. We have delivered within budgets, improved performance, and I'm sure the residents of Harlow will be pleased about that. Thank you. Do I have a second for that?
I second that, yeah.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Charles.
Thanks, Chair. Page 193, looking at the major variances. Under the Playhouse, the 200k overspend, which in the explanatory notes it says is related to the Playhouse Capital Investment Programme. It's a technical accounting question, but I would have thought that this wouldn't be in the general fund, it would be in the capital budget, the council capital budget. Is there a reason why this is featuring in the general fund?
Yeah, so previously we've been able to charge certain elements of staff time to certain elements of capital schemes. Unfortunately that changed during 2018-19 and full cost was borne with the general fund. So therefore there's a benefit to the capital programme but a disadvantage to the general fund.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. There will be comment obviously coming afterwards. Page 179, paragraph 14, the last sentence reads, subject to cabinet decision, forecast level for 1920 on the general fund will be 1.8 million above the minimum recommended balance. Now, the recommended minimum balance in the MTFS is 2.5 million. And so I'm wondering what specific risks and likelihoods have been identified since then, requiring the additional 1.8 million reserve on the general fund.
So I think in response to Councillor Carter's question, I think those reasons were set out in the reports that was brought forward to the Cabinet meeting back in January, and we're very much focused around the uncertainties that we face over and above our normal ongoing issues around the changes in our funding arrangements, potentially from 2021, although we currently don't have details of what those changes will be. So I recommended back in January that it would be prudent to operate above the minimum level to enable us to be confident of moving into that new funding arrangement with sufficient reserve should they be required to ride through any transition period.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I attended the local government conference only a couple of weeks ago. Councillors all over the country are tearing their hair out about the uncertainty of finance next year. We were due to actually be dependent on the business rate. The government, the chaotic government, has given up governing this country. Brockenshear came and addressed us with warm words and told us, as the Minister, I know nothing as well because I might not be in this job in 2 weeks' time. We are governed by chaos at the moment, and given those circumstances, Chair, it's very prudent to actually keep some money back until the government finally gets its act together and actually tells us one way or the other how it's going to actually shape up local government finances for the future.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the response. If there is an identifiable risk and likelihood, then why isn't the minimum balance just increased £4 million? I don't understand why we have to have this sort of fluffy bit sort of carried on from month to month. Anyway, there we are.
Sorry, was that a question?
No.
I think we're still on questions, Councillor Carter.
Yes, I realise that. Paragraph 17, you've already referred to the £1 million Environment Fund and how it was spent last year. I'm not aware of any details of that, but I was interested in your comment that some of this money have been spent on improving parking, when in that £1 million spent last year, or
Councillor Carter, what I said was the new money, 1.3 million, would include environmental spending, including parking. And I said the environmental part is building on the success of the money that we spent on environmental improvements last year. I didn't say last year's million had been spent on parking. If I wasn't clear,
I'm grateful for all the clarification, but probably not tonight. If somebody can provide me as to where that £1 million has gone, I'd certainly be very interested, and I'm sure the residents will be interested to see exactly where that money has gone.
is that a question?
That's a question, yes, I'd like to know
The
where
answer
money
is yes, I'm happy to provide that for you.
Thank you. Good. When?
Oh, I think I could do it in the next couple of days.
Well, no, excellent, thank you, Mr. On page 199, we were talking about Veolia and the new contract. One of the aspects of the new contract was that we were not going to collect green waste in bags anymore.
So on this page.
199.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of the aspects of the new contract was that we weren't going to collect waste in bags anymore. But I understand we are still doing that, which requires the bags to be ripped open and the waste dumped in the back of the truck. Unfortunately, because it wasn't included in the contract, the vehicles don't have anywhere to store the empty bags. So I'm just wondering when the bag ban will come in. So I'm happy to
Have
work
a
on that.
van following a van following a van.
I think that's quite technical. If you can come
Yes.
back to it.
7 days?
Certainly can do it in 7 days.
Thank you. Page 104. Page 104, we're looking at the proposed end of the year general fund earmark reserves movements. I'm wondering if it's possible that the balances of each of those reserves could be added to that table and perhaps circulated with the minutes, just to put the actual movements in perspective. There's all sorts of movements going on there. For example, £42,000 has been spent from the streetlight reserve. Does this mean we're still paying Essex Council to have the lights on between midnight and 5 o'clock?
The answer to the last question is yes. It was a long-term agreement that we entered into, and the reserve, as we previously have discussed in cabinet meetings, was to help meet the inflation cost on that contractual arrangement going forward. In terms of the closing balances, I can certainly make those available, and they are already available on the website on the draft statement of accounts which we published.
Okay. Also, on the fifth item on that table, referring to environmental urgent works, I quote, to finance works in the Harlow wider town area. Does this mean there is spending outside of the Harlow town area?
So no, they are all being spent within Harlow, and it refers to the item that the Leader of the Council mentioned in the introduction to the report on £1 million of investments.
So the use of the wider town down is unnecessary.
Again, is that a question?
Not really.
No, I don't think so.
Right. Thank you.
Any questions? Other questions? Anybody like to comment on the JFPR?
Yep. Thank you. In your introduction, you were very gracious in the commenting on the performance of HTS, both in terms of the KPIs and the health and safety, and I'm sure Councillor Vince will join me in that. I was interested in your use of the word "we" in reference to HTS, when HTS is an entirely separate legal entity with its own management and board of directors, and it is they who actually deliver the performance of the company, subject to the service level agreement, of course. But I think it's fair to distinguish. There are two separate organisations here. Both of them are doing well. Council's own KPI is very good, and state staff have to be congratulated on that.
Thank you. And just come back to you that by we, I meant people that are serving the residents of Harlow. Thank you. And by we, those that are delivering the services to the residents of Harlow so successfully this year. Councillor Charles.
Well, thank you, Chair. Obviously, a lot of attention has been focused on the comprehensive spending review and how that will factor in local government spending, other particular issues around social care. As far as what the government has said this week, the work is being undertaken to review spending, although there hasn't been an official announcement on the status of the comprehensive spending review. It isn't actually technically delayed because that was due to come in the autumn. But clearly all councillors want to see the kick-off of the comprehensive spending review because it will factor in local government funding. What is interesting about this performance report, and it's something that the leader of our group has said repeatedly at Cabinet, is with any major organisation, particularly within local government, it is very important, perhaps it's a role for the Audit and Standards Committee, Audit and Risk Committee, to look at how we can, in terms of ensuring momentum within the council, have wider stretch targets on some of the key performance indicators. And I think that's always best practice. It's something that Andrew, our group leader, has always talked about. And I'd be interested to see as the new key performance indicators are developed, not only from an administration perspective, but also from Brian as the Managing Director of the Council, how you see that forming and shaping up and what the timeline is to look at how we can look at, say, let's push the boundaries here and try and improve the performance with stretch targets.
If I may. Yes, I mean, we review the targets annually, as you would expect. because clearly I was expecting that question. When you do 100% 3 times on the trot, somebody's going to say, well, are these targets really the ones we should be looking at? I think my first comment on that is, since I've been here, we've never once hit them 100% until 3 ago. And those targets have not been made weaker in order to do that, but now quite clearly we need to look at them to make sure, well, can we stretch them even more? And it may be that when we come back we'll have missed a few, but that's no bad thing because we're looking at stretching them. So we are reviewing them, and we do continually.
Any other comments? Right then, are we happy to accept the recommendation A, B and C as laid out on page 176?
Yes, agreed.
Great.
Thank you. So now let's move on to agenda item 12, the Housing Revenue Account Outturn Report 2018-19, which you will find on pages 205 to 215.
So moved, Chair.
And I second that, Chair.
Again? Do you want to make any comments?
Well, only briefly, Chair. As ever, really, in recent years, good financial control. The office is really doing quite a good job on this. The variation of the budget, small overspend of 121,000, which, given the size of the budget, is less than 1% of the actual budget. Taking into account adjustments to the housing capital programme and the impacts, the underspend really, in that regard, is further looked at on pages 213 to 215. So unless people want me to go into that detail, the explanation is given there, Chair.
So, questions? Any comments? No? That's a comment. Thank you.
Comment. Yes, sir. Please know there were no questions. Just want to explain the cross-party working I think there is on housing, which has been going on for a number of years. Certainly, any sort of questions and so forth I do have, I am receiving answers to them, and also actually contributing to the debate on some occasions as well. So we do work together sometimes.
Indeed, I understand you asked somewhere between 10 and 20 questions at the last.
I'm sorry?
I understand you asked some 10 to 20 questions at the last standards.
I ask questions all the time.
Agreed. Right. If there are no further statements to be made, do we agree to accept the recommendations A,
Agree.
B and C on pages 205 to 206?
Agreed.
Thank you. Let's move on then. The Capital Programme's Outturn Report 2018 to 19, which you'll find on page 216 to 227.
I so moved that, Chair.
Thank you.
And I formally second that, Chair.
Any comments?
Well, I would say, I hark back to the earlier discussion, to a certain extent, with government cutback so severely, increasingly with capital programmes becomes one of capacity. I hope you remember 20 years ago when I was leading the council, this authority had 1,600 employees, it now has 400. When one actually looks at the very mean ship that we actually run now, it's no surprise sometimes because of capacity that the capital programme is not always quite fulfilled, but nevertheless everything's there and it's actually being done quite well. The highlights, Chair, the refurb, which was referred to earlier on, was the continued refurbishment of the playhouse, the ongoing infrastructure works of the Harlow Enterprise Zone, and the process of our new building on that site, which will eventually bring in an income, one hopes, of about £500,000 a year. The very, very commendable, I just find it incredible, the play facility next door to the Pets Corner. Every time I'm walking my dog there, Chair, the number of very young children with their parents is absolutely outstanding. It's almost, even if it's, the weather's bad, the kids are still there, and it's just an amazing new playground. The general playground refurbishments are across the town, and finally we're getting there with Francis Place as well, but that's another side, Chair.
I think the scaffolding is coming down in Francis Place, and I'll just draw Councillor's attention to, before we move on, you mentioned the playground at Pets Corner. I don't know if you're aware, Councillor Danvers, but Harlow's won another award for that hugely successful playground.
Yeah, I was just going to, in second minutes, just add on to, I certainly concur with Councillor Danvers' remarks, but also add on to his remarks. I think it's worth noting in this report the refurbishment of Bromley Cottages that done within the capital programme is absolutely phenomenal success, and it's not about making money, it's actually about delivering a really important service. But also within the capital programme, the work that's being done on fire safety within the town, which is being covered in this report and the capital programme, another very important issue that this council's tackled, and I believe tackled very, very well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're on to questions. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. On page 218, my eye was drawn to the budget variances, in particular, and this is one for Mark and Andrew, purely out of interest. When you look at internal works and you look at the variance there that's 345, it's purely out of interest. What is driving the upward pressures there? This isn't a loaded question, it's just an area of interest, obviously, for internal works, whether it be bathrooms, toilets or kitchens or whatever. I'd be interested to know if in this year in particular there's been certain pressures that have added to the reason why there's been that variance.
I think we are in an environment around transition where our focus since 2012 was decent homes. And we spent over £100 million to achieve decent homes by 2015, which is a very good news story. The second stage of that is that we're tackling more complex issues now.
Okay.
And we're finding that properties that are coming back void require more work than we had anticipated. And that's what we're having to deal with in terms of that type.
Thank you. Once again, my questions on the housing programme. Again, just like Councillor Charles, I just have a query on page 225, table A2, when we talk about the carryovers on the non-housing capital programme, about £39,000 for the Stowe public toilet conversion. Just intrigued as to what it's going to be converted to, bearing in mind that the whole area is designated for regeneration.
I'll answer the council on that with a written response.
Thank you.
Can I just add that the public lavatories is a subject of discussion at the moment and investigation, so I can't answer the question, but I'm certainly, the topic is live, shall we say.
Is it?
Yes.
Well, Chair, through the Chair, please, Councillor.
Chair, when the toilets were glibly closed all over the town by the last administration, what was not taken into account was all of the on-costs, including things like the business rate, that remain. And at the end of the day, those buildings, unfortunately, still exist. And I'm guessing a bit here, but presumably there are other issues that we have to actually make sure that things like... It's a disgrace that they were closed in the first place, and now we've got slightly more cash. As Eugene said, at least we can actually start to have another look. When you go to almost any other town, there are, in terms of civilization, there are toilets. The Victorians could provide them. I'm quite sure 100 years on, as a much wealthier country, we can actually get back to actually looking at the provision of public toilets in this town.
Yeah, again, thank you, Councillor Danvers. The question's been asked. We've said we'll get back to you on the detail on it. I think we can move on.
You raised it, Sam.
Yeah, I just
okay, and let's move on. Thank you. Any more questions? Right, would anybody like to comment? So, are we happy to accept recommendations A, B, C and D on pages 216 and page 270?
Agreed.
Thank you. So now we move on to item 14 on our crowded agenda, the revision of the London Road North Enterprise Zone Local Development Order, pages 228 to 234. Councillor Perry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is quite a technical matter, but I hope colleagues will excuse me for explaining it in a little bit more detail. The local development order was, as it says in the report, was drawn up or approved some 5 years ago, and it sets out policies and described the layout of the enterprise zone, which enabled us to give almost pre-planning application approval for developers, which obviously is very helpful, not only to them in terms of their planning for how they want to proceed, but also it's useful in working out the value of the property. So obviously, as everybody knows, land increases in value with planning approval. In those 5 years, as we all know, the enterprise zone has moved on very successfully, and I'm sure Tony will be able to give more information about the economic side of the enterprise zone, whereas I'm really dealing with the planning issue of the local development order. But we now need, after 5 years, obviously we've moved on with the development and things have changed in that time. What we had planned to do is obviously slightly altered. What we want to do in the future is slightly different. And therefore we need to make some revisions to the local development order, not in any principle, but simply to change some of the wording of the local development order that reflects the ongoing needs of the enterprise zone. And those are set out in Appendix A. And they mainly relate to the siting of various utilities, the layout of roads, to reflect the, if you like, the people that are coming on to the site now, as distinct from the ones that were envisaged 5 years ago. I mean, it's a sign of the rapid growth of the enterprise zone that we're having to make these changes within 5 years. But as I say, it's a fairly straightforward report asking for the Cabinet to approve the proposed amendments shown in Appendix A and let us get on with the continuing successful development of the enterprise zone. I'm sure Tony might have something to say about the success.
Thank you, Chancellor.
I'm happy to second the report. I'll hold my comments until it's the discussion part.
Questions? Comments?
Yeah, Chair. First of all, can I thank Andrew Bromwich for providing a tour for Simon and I think when people saw Simon and I in hard hats and high vis, there were many secretaries who went on a Diet Coke break, but there you go. What I would say though is obviously we welcome the flexibility that has been proposed to the local development order. Obviously there has been historic support for this. The Harlow Science Park sits within my ward, so I take a special interest in that. I am just grateful for the ongoing dialogue that we have with Andrew and particularly Councillor Durkin in the constructive approach that we're doing here, particularly because this is another linchpin in the local economy.
Thank you. Councillor Durkin.
I'm getting lots of it. Sorry, you've already been to Nexus House. I was going to take you to the top floor then.
Oh.
No, it's a good view. It's a good view, isn't it? And it's actually a great. Sorry, when we take over, Chair, we'll take over the building in September. I will want and invite Cabinet members and all councillors to actually come into the building, and we would have a conversation on the top floor, because it really does give you a fantastic view of what the Harlow Science Park is. And this is why this report is so important, that as my colleague Danny has said, it does give us and provides us with the flexibility that enables us to build what we want when we want it, and to build it at the right time for the right reasons. However, we do need to be absolutely clear that if we are doing anything, there will be public consultation. So we don't want the residents of Old Harlow or New Hall to be concerned or worried about this, and also to have those assurances, which is also contained in the report, is that this development zone stays within our current boundaries. It doesn't move anywhere else, so no one else should have any fears or concerns about these areas. But as Danny was saying, over the last 2 years we have found some technical problems. It's like the electric substation and the challenges that we've been facing there, which therefore has restricted us in being able to look at our food, drink and leisure industry that we actually want to put on that site for the people who are going to be working there. So that's why this report is a technical report, but it's an important report because it does allow us that flexibility to make those choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gove. There's no other comments. Are we happy to accept recommendations A and B on page 228?
Agreed.
Thank you. So now we move on to agenda item 15, the Housing Assistance Policy, Home Adaptation for Disabled People, pages 235 to 240.
I'll move that, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
I will be very brief because I don't think this is a contentious item at all. I welcome this report very much so, and the report's quite clear and precise. This is about better joined up thinking between local authorities and welfare panels, and obviously more importantly the NHS. We all see the common terminology about bed blocking in hospitals across this country. Many people seem to head sometimes to hospital because basically they don't have a home that's so fit for purpose for them to return to. And this is obviously a step in the right direction. We already get funded anyway, but now we have increased funding to try and address some of these really important issues for people. And I certainly welcome the report. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Questions? None? Good. Any? Add anything?
I was just going to add that I saw a couple of case studies of people who would be very positively affected by this. People with terminal illnesses who have got very short lifespan and are not able to be in their home in the kind of comfort that you would hope for someone in their last month. So reading those short case studies really brought home to me how incredibly important this is. So it's great.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I welcome this report. I've had a number of cases in Old Harlow where home adaptations for disabled people has been really important. So I've had cases where I've had blind and visually impaired individuals that have required guiding lighting in their kitchen to prepare meals and to navigate their household. Also, wheelchair users accessing monies for home adaptations is really important. It's a fundamental issue that on a cross-authority basis sometimes has to be dealt with. So I very much welcome this. Obviously, within the budget in 2018, the Chancellor announced the additional 45 million for the Disabled Facilities Grant, which has enabled actually to see an increase in local authorities being able to support disabled people in their homes to have the required home adaptations, and that's something I think that we can all agree is a positive step forward.
Councillor Shears.
So I also welcome this report, and I wanted to just say about people that are inappropriately placed in hospital because they don't have the right adaptations or the right property to come home. And what we do know is that people thrive better in their own homes than they do in hospital. So this is a really, really welcome report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As everybody said, welcome this report. No, it's not non-contentious. And also to recognise a bit of common sense by the government in relaxing the regulations to improve the lives of people, as we've already heard. I'm not going to repeat all that. Just to thank the officers for the briefing they gave me last week. Just on a very small detail, if I draw your attention to the bottom of page 240 to the footnotes, it refers to the ability of people to actually claim DFGs, and it says people with disabilities, the purpose of the policy means people who are entitled to be registered disabled and people receiving severe disablement allowance or disability living allowance. As I'm sure most of you are aware, you can't apply for DLA if you're over the age of 16. It's now a personal independence payment. So I'd be grateful when the policy is actually published, if that can be amended. Because obviously I wouldn't want people to sort of go all the way through this and then sort of stumble at the last step because they think they're not entitled to it.
I will make sure that's updated, sir.
Thank you.
Sorry, as a nursing professional, can I just say we need to drop this word bed blockers. They're not bed blockers, they're actually victims who are unfortunately have got themselves into a hospital and because of genuine reasons they cannot go back. And it sounds like a bed blocker means that they're doing it deliberately. No one wants to go to hospital. No, but that's actually true. So we need to make sure the terminology. I think one of the issues that we've got in Harlow, and we have to accept it, is a lot of the houses that were built in the 50s and 60s were badly designed, and that therefore they restrict our opportunities of making these adjustments that need to be. And what we need to do as the future people is that we've got to make sure that we design houses that are better designed, that are equipped to be able to be moved around and changed to enable a person to live in it for their whole life rather than for their section of the life. But we can do our bit as a council, but there is a fundamental crisis in social care, and unless we have a government that is strong enough to turn around, face it and deal with it, we can paint over the cracks as much as we possibly can, and we do and we will, because we care passionately for our community. We do need a strong government that is willing to commit to actually resolve the challenges that we have today and tonight around the terrible state of social care in our country.
Right, if there are no more comments, do we accept recommendations A and B on page 235?
Great.
Thank you. So now let's move on to item 17, carbon management.
Yes, Chair, as this report points out, in March 2016, the Cabinet agreed to adopt a carbon management plan for 5 years, which set the Council target to reduce its carbon emissions by 25%. To date, at the end of 2018-19, that's obviously last March, the Council had achieved a reduction of around about 14%. Obviously not, if you look at it in a linear sense, they're obviously not going to achieve on the basis of what they were doing at the time, they were obviously not going to achieve the 25% by the end of 2021. The officers have therefore brought forward a number of further projects which would enable them to meet the target, but they're concerned that they might not be able to meet the target by the end of 2021. You were referring earlier to a stretch issue. Well, this is stretching where the finishing line is. It's moving the finishing line possibly another year on in order to achieve the 25%. Obviously, it's regrettable that that situation has come about, but you know, it's easy for councillors to set targets. It's not always easy for officers to meet those targets, and they're trying as hard as they can with the plans that they put forward. It's also interesting in the report to note that 50% of the council's total carbon emissions are produced by the various parts of the operational fleet of vehicles. And as we remember from the council meeting last week, we've announced our intention to move towards vehicles that don't make those carbon emissions. And so overall, I think that we are going to move rapidly to achieve a new target as part of our climate emergency programme. But anyway, this report is asking us to approve the possible extension of the carbon management plan an extra year, unless, of course, as it says, unless the target is reached prior to this date, which the plan would have been achieved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll second that. Are there any questions? Any comments? Right, well then, you're too quick for me. Are we happy to accept the recommendation A on page 247?
Agreed.
Right, communications from committees, working groups, parties and panels. There's a supplementary communication to the Cabinet Overview Working Group. We are, as a result of the council meeting last Thursday, we're asking the Cabinet Overview Working Group to look at issues around the green agenda that this council adopted when it declared a climate emergency, things like the costs of photovoltaic cells and the suitability of all of our buildings to accommodate those. Do we need to approve that?
We do.
Are we agreed to send that?
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Great.
Thank you. Agenda item 19, the minutes of panels working groups. We need to note the minutes of the shareholders subcommittee.
Noted.
Noted. Thank you. And there are no matters of urgent business. Thank you all for coming. I draw the meeting to a close.
Thank you.